Frances Hansen of the Historical Society of Palm Beach County. We are conducting an oral history today at 300 North Dixie in West Palm Beach, Florida. I am here with Mr. Douglas Carmichael Fulton. Good morning, Mr. Fulton.
Good morning.
Would you please state and spell your full name?
Douglas, D-O-U-G-L-A-S, Carmichael, C-A-R-M-I-C-H-A-E-L, Fulton, F-U-L-T-O-N. And I believe the date today may be the 11th, I'm thinking.
Yes, sir. Is there any special meaning to your middle name?
Yes, I was named after my mother's family. M.D. Carmichael was, I was told, the first elected mayor of West Palm Beach, the city. His home place was where the First Baptist Church with the chapel by the lake existed. The chapel by the lake originally was an island off the coast, and he built a little bridge over, and it was way out in the woods. Occasionally his daughter, my mother, and her mother, his wife, would have to come into the center of West Palm to see civilization, because they had deer and all kinds of things running through their yards and felt like they were a bit isolated out there. So I was named after my grandfather as far as my middle name.
Do you have any unusual nicknames or funny names that your family have given you over the years?
None I want to repeat.
Very good. Where were you born?
I was born at Good Sam in West Palm Beach, Good Samaritan Hospital.
The date of your birth?
11/3/43.
Do you have any brothers or sisters?
I do. I have a brother, Charles Britton Fulton Jr., who's 5.5 years older than I am. He is an Episcopal priest. I just spent a weekend with him. He is an Episcopal priest in Atlanta, Georgia. And he picked up my grandfather Carmichael's love of horses. He had shown horses and just devoted all of his spare time to raising horses, and has been very successful.
Are those the Tennessee walking horses?
First of all, I don't know enough to tell you, and secondly, I do not believe so, but they are horses that perform and are show horses. Whether he has a walker or not, I don't know.
What about your grandparents? What could you share with us?
You know, unfortunately, I can't share a lot, because I came along, I was the youngest. My parents had my brother, and then they lost a child in between, and then I came along, and I'm 5.5 years younger. I never saw either of my grandparents on my father's side. I never saw my grandmother, Lily Mae Cleveland Carmichael. And I only recall seeing my grandfather, M.D. Carmichael, on 3 or 4 occasions. I was that young. I'm sure I saw him more, but I'm sorry, I just don't recall it. He sold his property where he lived, where the church is now located, to the Baptist Church, which was at that time across Olive on the west side. And he retained a life estate. His wife, my grandmother, and my mother formed Memorial Presbyterian Church on their front porch. And so Memorial was just down the street south of his home place while he was still alive and living there prior to it passing to the Baptist. So the several occasions I remember seeing him, we would run as soon as Sunday school was over, hoping to miss church and visit Granddaddy, and we did that frequently.
Lovely. What is your mother's full name?
Well, Imogene Carmichael Fulton. Mm-hmm.
And then you were discussing her occupation as starting a church. Could you go into a little bit more detail about that?
Well, of course, I'm very proud of my parents. My mother was a concert quality violinist and actually studied at the Juilliard School of Music. Everybody in the Carmichael family was musical, unlike the Fultons. We can't even play the radio, and that goes back generations, apparently. In fact, our churches where we go ask us not to join in and sing. But my mother was very, very musical and taught violin for a while, played in most of the churches or in most of the civic functions around West Palm, which was a very small place back then. We knew everybody. She became the greatest mom and housewife that you could find, but my mother would not be left behind. My dad loved to hunt and fish, and my mother bought herself a shotgun, and she went duck hunting with us out in the glades, which were the glades back then. It was wild. And my dad had a love of golf. My mother had played briefly on a golf course developed by her father, M.D. Carmichael, out where Belvedere Homes are today, what we call Belvedere Homes. My mother won. My mother had 4 holes in one. She won the handicap championship at West Palm Beach Country Club, which was the big club in those days. And she and I, when I was in my freshman year of high school, won the county 2-ball championship. That's where you alternate shots. And I played on the freshman team at Wake Forest University, but I wasn't in the league with the guys that they were running through there. Plus, my parents emphasized education. I don't care if you could have been Jack Nicklaus. If I dropped out of school, I just wouldn't have had parents to go home to. So, but my mother was successful at whatever she did, and she loved West Palm Beach. My dad got appointed to the federal bench down in Miami, and Miami was like the New York City to us. People don't realize it'd take a half a day to drive to Miami in those days. You went right down US 1. And it was a place that we had all said we would never live. And my dad gets appointed to the federal bench, and actually they moved down to Coral Gables, and I think to make it more palatable for my mother, he made sure he got a house on the Riviera Country Club down there. And I was at the University of Florida at that time, and my dad begged me to come down and finish up at Miami because my mother just absolutely didn't know anybody and was not in very good health, unfortunately, by that time. So I did, and I finished my undergrad there and got my law degree and went to work for a judge who was a federal judge who was based in Miami. Some of the happiest times we really had in later life were in Coral Gables playing golf, but we always had this yearning. There was never any doubt in my mind that when I graduated from school I was going to go back to West Palm, which I did. And my father took the federal judgeship on the sort of the promise that they would open up a federal court within 3 years in West Palm Beach, a branch. They didn't for 11 years, but he still came back when they opened it up.
Excellent.
I hope that wasn't too lengthy.
No. What would you say, talking obviously you were very close with your mother, what would you say was a very important lesson that she was able to impart to you that you have used throughout your life?
Well, my mother was the ultimate lady and taught me manners and decorum and ways that we don't even think about in treating ladies, for instance. You didn't sit down when a lady was in the room standing. I don't care if you had both legs cut off. If you were on the bus and there was one seat, you gave it to a lady. The thought of disappointing my mother was the most terrible thought in my mind. And disappointing my dad. My dad was a strong, firm man, but very fair. And he too taught those values. It was a whole different world. You couldn't imagine, I don't mean you personally, but people today can't imagine the way we were trained when we went through school. And it was to honor adults and treat them with dignity and shut your mouth when you were out in crowds where you ought to shut your mouth. And a gentlemanly behavior. She taught me a love of just about everything. Hunting and fishing. She and I would be on a deer stand together north of Okeechobee. She and I played a lot of golf together. She was my favorite golf partner. And parents had a rule that when one of them said no, that went for both of them, and if you wanted to get your teeth knocked out, just go try the other one after one said no. And there was, I just think it was a total code of honor. You didn't do things because you would get in trouble. You did things because you were on the side of your parents. You wanted to behave. You wanted to pay them back for what they have done for you.
I definitely understand. That's how I was raised.
Okay. And I certainly didn't mean to you
Oh, no,
personally when
no,
said it,
I
but I mean
understand.
the world
But
right
today,
now
yeah,
just
students
doesn't
today
seem to
aren't.
get it.
I concur. Well, then we're going to get right into your father.
Okay.
What was your father's full name?
His name was Charles Britton Fulton. His mother was Lillian Britton Fulton, and I was told that she was the first lady to get an earned doctorate of theology degree in, I believe it was Indiana University. There again, I never met her. Unfortunately, it breaks my heart. But she had the largest church, I'm told, in Lake Worth as a pastor for a number of years, a congregational church which moved in location, and it's still in Lake Worth, and there's a big picture of her in the foyer, or the cultivated people call it anyway. When you walk in, you see her picture. And he really idolized his mother because his father had left early on and she was responsible. His sister Mabel Bowell married George Bowell of Bowell Dairies, and I loved Uncle George as if he were blood, and he was my best man at my wedding. And then Bob Fulton was later superintendent of public instruction, was the younger of the three of them.
That's lovely. And then as we're going to go back to your father's occupation.
Yes, my dad told me that he had never in his life ever wanted to be anything but a lawyer. He grew up really, really poor. Ministers didn't make much money back then. And his mother would have to travel on speaking engagements around the state of Florida. They were living in Jacksonville, as I recall, at that time, before she got the call to the church at Lake Worth. And I think it grieved my father to see his mother have to work so hard to support the three because she was a single mother, and the father just never came back, left. And I forgot the exact thing. I was getting lost a little bit in history, but my father went to the University of, well, first of all, he went 2 years to Washington and Lee University. He did extremely well up there, but was unable to continue because he didn't have any money. He came back, and somebody suggested, in those days apparently you did not need a 4-year degree to go to law school. And he went back with well, first of all, he came back and taught at Coniston Junior High School and planted a big tree out front, which was there when I went there, because I was educated in the public schools here. Then he went back to the University of Florida and met one of the world's angelic women, a woman named Isla R. Pridgeon, who was on the faculty of the law college, and she had lost her husband. She ran kind of a boarding house for law students particularly. And she and a former Supreme Court justice named Judge Cockrell, who I think was the only Supreme Court justice to ever get beaten in a statewide election, but he also was a professor at the University of Florida. They took my father under their wing, and they gave him jobs such as greasing law books in the library for 40 cents an hour or whatever. But my dad was an extremely hard-working, motivated man, and he would have done anything to get through law school. He later came back and practiced law here, and I've even worked for several people that worked for him in the private practice of law. I was in that for 14 years before I went with the state attorney's office. there was a nomination for the federal court in Miami, and apparently the senators got at loggerheads, each one wanting their own candidate, and the candidates apparently themselves for the one position on the federal bench started talking in the newspapers and embarrassing everybody, including the senators that were backing him. And so my father was kind of a compromise candidate, but it wasn't that he wasn't well qualified. He had been president of the Florida Bar. He had been president of the Palm Beach County Bar, and I think it was amazing that he was president of the Florida Bar because he was never in a huge firm, with a lot of backing. He always had 3 or 4 lawyers in his firm. So he went on the federal court in Miami, which necessitated the change of location of address for us, one we never dreamed of making, but all things turn out well if you give it a shot, and we had a very good experience there too.
What was one really important philosophy he imparted to you when you began your law career?
Integrity, purely and simply. Don't lie. My dad had 3 outstanding and overshadowing rules around our house. People thought I lived in a very tough household because my dad was a big man and could be kind of intimidating just by appearance. We didn't. The 3 rules were don't lie, cheat, or steal. And till he was on his deathbed, if my father had heard that I had misrepresented something woefully to a judge or anybody, he would have gotten out of bed and taken a bell to me. He thought that lawyers were somewhere between men and angels, that they had a tremendous calling to keep the government off the back of the common man. And I'm pleased to see that we're doing some pro bono work, but back in those days, I think more pro bono work was done by lawyers just on their own with people that came in and said, I don't have any money. And there were 2 ladies, that a lady named Miss McCleister and Brownie, I can't remember last name. Anyway, they were connected with child adoption, and my father instilled such a value in me of public service that for those 14 years, I bet I did 30, maybe more adoptions for free, because when I heard that somebody, and I didn't get any awards and I didn't want any awards, I thought that's what you were supposed to do as a lawyer. And when people came in and were willing to give a child a home and had no money, I felt that, even and the people I worked with were very understanding. We'd even pay the cost of the adoption occasionally.
Wow. Nice.
So he just had the highest respect for lawyers, and to see lawyers trash each other in court, he would put you in jail when he was on the bench. He just would not put up with it.
No problem too.
He felt that was just so unlawyer-like, and really gave lawyers a bad name. And he indicated to me late in his life when he was very, very ill that he was extremely disappointed that the bar had not policed itself better and presented a better public image.
I would agree. What was it like growing up in Palm Beach County? The area, getting around in the area.
Well, I've always thought that Palm Beach County is an idyllic place to grow up. I mean, we were 15 minutes from the ocean. We were 45, well, back in those days, we were an hour and a half from Lake Okeechobee. If you wanted to go shoot doves, you could go out to Military Trail because that's where civilization ended. And State Road 7, many people had hunting cabins out there where they would go for the weekend because, you were just away from civilization completely, and wild turkeys and deer and the whole thing were out there. Of course, Wellington was really going into the woods. Nobody would ever go out, or Royal Palm. The thought that anybody would ever live out there, and understand, I'm not knocking it, they're beautiful places, but in those days they were just not even conceived. Everybody knew everybody. There was no crime whatsoever. The biggest arguments I ever saw my parents have was when my dad started going up to North Carolina in the summers because when I was a boy, almost every year somebody in my class would come down with polio. It was just a horrible thing. And my dad felt that polio was a disease of the tropics and of heat, so he built a little cabin up in North Carolina on a golf course that was owned by my wife's father. That's how I met my wife, going up there. So we were out of here in the summers. It was a wonderful life to grow up in this county. There were so many role models. I hear about advertisements about sign up for this and that and give a child a role model. Well, I had 20 role models at my father's age that I wanted to be just like. Good men, responsible guys, gave back to the community, really cared. We had only one Little League, if you can believe that, in Palm Beach County. That was down at Phipps Park. And one of the former circuit judges, who is now retired, was my Little League coach, Judge Emery Newell. And to this day, I love that man. I mean, if he said, run through the wall out there in center field, I would have given it my best shot. And you could be gone for an evening on the weekends and your parents wouldn't worry because you had a close group of friends. And like I said, there was no crime, and maybe you sleep over at so-and-so's house and all of that. Wonderful education, I thought. I was in the first graduating class at Forest Hill High School, and just a wonderful group of kids to grow up with. We did very well on what they had an old test called the Florida Placement Test, and that test was a forerunner to the LSAT, except it was only recognized by the schools like Florida and FSU in the state of Florida. And our school did very well on it, and it just broke my heart to see the new facility that Forest Hill has and realize how academically deficient it had become over the years. It was not like that. And of course, I love going over to Forest Hill because occasionally I'd sneak over to the West Palm Beach Country Club when I wasn't feeling well, of course, and go hit a few balls. And I could walk to school. I didn't walk to school. I walked through the snow or the ice or anything, nothing like that. But when things got busy, it was 20 minutes to walk to school from where I lived. As I say, there was never any worry about safety or anything like that. And as far as kids getting away with anything, you couldn't, because all the parents knew each other, and bad news would beat you home.
Travel fast.
I love the outdoors. My daddy bought some property on the North Fork of the St. Lucie River. And when I got able to drive, which was in my junior year, I would get a backpack and go up there and spend a couple of days, sometimes stretching the weekend a little bit, just to walk in the wilds of Florida, and just did that this weekend, as a matter of fact, at a kind of a resort, but it's just old Florida. So life, we didn't realize it at the time. It's like we have a tendency to do. We don't realize how good we had it, but it was really, really wonderful to grow up here. I could walk in Florida National Bank if my dad had given me a check for something, and I could cash it, and everybody there knew me. I've been banking at the same bank, which has had 34 names, I think, since we started. Started out as Barnett, and then Nations, and then this, and that, and nobody knows me. I have to produce 6 types of ID, but when I was a boy, I just walked in, hi, Doug.
Yeah, that I do remember as a child.
What would you say event that happened here had the most impact on you as a child?
Well, really, I feel that I've lived a charmed life. I didn't have anything happen that personally impacted me in a negative way. I think the most stunning event that happened was the murder of Judge Chillingworth when I think I was a senior in high school. Judge Chillingworth had been in the military and was stationed in Pensacola at the same time. My dad and mother were up there, and they lived together in the same area of military housing and knew each other. And apparently, well, my mother was a wonderful cook, and apparently they got to know each other, and my dad just had the highest respect for Judge Chillingworth. And the thought, first of all, of a murder in Palm Beach County was unthinkable, and the gruesome details that came out later about how he was killed, it's so different than now, because you pick up the paper and you see there's a drive-by shooting, and of course I spent 25 years of my life prosecuting people that did that kind of stuff. But that was just unheard of. I was going to say the biggest argument I ever heard between my folks was we'd get ready to go to North Carolina and nobody could find a key to lock the house. And we had absolutely zero air conditioning in the school. I hear these students griping about their facilities. Well, you know, going and taking a shower after gym was just like going into a sauna, and after you finished, you came out into a sauna. But my dad and mom would start about a month before we went to Carolina and said, "Do you know where the key to the back door now?" And we also had French doors in the front, which one set was on the right side as you looked at the house and you walked in the door. The other side were false doors, but they were just screens. I've said laughingly, you could get into our house at 12 o'clock at night with a nail file. It was just screens. I mean, there was no crime. And I have really hated this. You know, we got an alarm now, and we worry when we leave about certain things, and I don't think we were ever meant to do that.
What would you say is one of the most significantly different things that you recognize as when you were a child in this area growing up today than what you see today for children growing up?
I think that growing up back then, you got a better feel for where you were. For instance, once a year, the Seminole Indian tribe would come into the stadium, which was behind the School of Arts, I think it's called now. I think then it was Cooley Memorial Stadium, and was actually the home football field for the Palm Beach High Wildcats. My brother went to Palm Beach High School because he was 5.5 years older. I went to the first class at Forest Hill, which was down in our area. But once a year, the Seminole Indians, for instance, would come in and conduct a public part of what they called the green corn dance, and sell tickets and sell the, of course, multicolored shirts that they're famous for, and dolls made out of sable palm husk and all of that. But it was actually part of their rite of passage for their young men, almost like a bar mitzvah if you wanted to look at it. And part of it they were willing to do in public, and the dancing and storytelling about Florida. And the whole town would practically turn out. I mean, we were a very small place. You got to see government at work, because in front of the old library downtown was a band show. And it sloped up and had theater type in the open. It was, and almost every politician, whether they were local or state or whatever, would come down and debate at the band show. And again, the whole town would practically turn out. So you saw government in action, and I think it was a real head start. I remember one time they had Adolf Hitler's private Mercedes-Benz on display around the country, and boy, that was the talk of the town. And they had plaster or paper mache figures of Hitler and his driver and all that. I thought it was one of the when I heard what he was about, I thought it was one of. I was just a kid. I thought it was one of the scariest things I'd ever seen. It was this big black Mercedes and the swastika and all that stuff. But there again, the whole community turned out for stuff like that, for the political debates, and there was a oneness of community that I think is just so extremely lacking now that it's hurtful to see. there weren't many issues that divided this community right down the middle. Like, I think the whole country right now is pretty well divided. And one of my personal heroes, Abraham Lincoln, quoted my Lord and said, "A house divided cannot stand." So I hope we can get it together.
What was your address here in West Palm Beach with your parents, and then your present address?
Where I lived?
Yes, sir.
We started out at 1020, I believe it was North Dixie. Anyway, it was a two-story residence with a little apartment in back. If I'm taking too long, just tell me. And my mother had inherited that home from her mother when she died very early on. And we lived in the bottom of that and rented out, my parents rented out the top floor and the place in back. That was 1020 North Dixie. I'm thinking it may have been 1020 South Dixie. I'm probably thinking more about it. It was 1020 South Dixie. Anyway, it was just north of Belvedere Road. Up on that. My dad was able to buy a house at 322 Colonial Road, which is between Olive and Dixie and south of Southern Boulevard. And we lived there all of my childhood, which put me in South Olive Elementary, Palmetto Elementary, and Coniston, and the neat thing was you went to school with the same kids the whole time. I graduated with kids I went to the first grade with. And a lot of them too, and it's made for continuing friendships and relationships. I mean, and it created a unity. Moved to Miami, of course, to go to law school. I lived in student housing and paid the princely sum of $76.50 a month for a lovely apartment, which was provided by the University of Miami. My wife started teaching school. We had our first child, but as soon as I possibly could, we moved back to West Palm Beach, and we bought a house on Miramar Way, which is down in the south end. It's the only street curvy. It's between Olive and Washington Road. My wife's sister, youngest sister, decided she wanted to come from Franklin, North Carolina, and come down and do some modeling and things, and she was a strikingly beautiful girl. So we asked her to come down, and that really cramped up our little house, even though we had a really good time. And my wife's father came down one spring and said, "I bought a house for you." And I said, "You what?" He said, "Well, I just put a down payment," and it was like 4th Street south of Miramar on Alhambra Place. And we have lived there 35 years. The house has grown. My son was able to live with us when he graduated from Palm Beach Atlantic. My daughter was able to come back and live with us as she studied for the bar exam and other things that she did in Texas. And so I haven't moved around a whole lot, and I actually live in essentially the same area of West Palm Beach all of my life. I love it. Alhambra is a dead-end street, and we had young kids, and that was what my father-in-law's thinking was, because our other house on Miramar was the 2nd Street off of Olive, and he was so afraid that the kids would get out in Olive. So he liked everything about it, and we loved the location, and we bought a place in Alabama thinking about retirement, but it's going to be very hard to leave this area because we like it so much.
I understand that. Now, what are your formal degrees that you received when you went into your higher education?
From all of my schooling?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, I graduated with a high school diploma from Forrestville High School. I graduated with an Associate of Arts from the University of Florida. I graduated with honors with a Bachelor of Business Administration from the University of Miami. I graduated with a back then, well, they just started awarding the JD degree, which was the law degree from the University of Miami. In 2002, I graduated summa cum laude with a master's degree in theology from Andersonville Theological Seminary. And in 2004, I graduated with a doctorate of theology, summa cum laude from Andersonville Theological Seminary.
Very impressive.
So you can see my family engendered in me a love of education. And I'm doing postgraduate work now with the Hebrew University online.
Fantastic. Do you speak Hebrew?
A little bit. Not as...
Manishma?
Uh,
Manishma?
Kasat Hebrew. What is it? Ani Mavin? Kasat Hebrew? Something like that. I speak very little.
That's
well,
wonderful.
really, I've gone into it to try to go back to the earliest manuscripts, and really my work has been in Paleo-Hebrew. When I travel to Israel, I stay with a family over there that will come over and stay with us on occasions. Wonderful, wonderful people. And they've been helping me with my Hebrew. And one time I went over recently and I said, I'm just going to speak Hebrew. And after about 5 minutes, the kids were laughing and everything else. And he said, no, I think you better stick English. So my conversational Hebrew, is passable. Mashlam ek, wouldn't it be to a female? Mashlam ek. Toast, I don't know. I love the language, and I'm, like I said, I'm still working on it. I would love to be totally fluent in it, but I'm more interested in the academic Paleo Hebrew, which was really an offshoot of the pictographs or hieroglyphics out of England. Out of Egypt. And you could see the transition there as it merged with Canaanite languages, and that's the area I'm looking at.
Because that's my master's is Egyptology.
Is that right?
Yes, sir.
So you understand the love and how that
Yes, sir, I
can
do.
almost infect you.
It does.
Or the urge to learn, and it's endless. A philosopher once said of that area of study, a child can wade in it. It's like a pool that a child can wade in, or an elephant can swim in, depending on how deep you want to go.
Yes, you've got to jump
So
deep.
I hope that the day before I die, I will still be reading in that area.
Yeah, you should. The day you stop learning is the day you should die.
Should be.
What is your present occupation? Are you retired now?
I'm retired. I was with the state attorney's office for 25 years. I've served under two wonderful state attorneys, David Bloodworth and Barry Krischer. The new administration came in and made some changes, and I was retired. I, right now, am teaching the Tanakh, and from a Christian point of view, but why it ought to be respected and so forth. And I have last year I traveled and put on a couple of Passover services for churches that had found out that I did that. And of all things, my son was a pastor at this church in Alabama, so I went up there and they had 700 people come in from the areas. They had to have 2 sessions. And then that was the year before last, and then last year I did it at a church in Texas, where my daughter goes, and they had 650 people. And you're talking about rural country people that you would think it wouldn't be too attractive to. Many people said it was really one of the highlights that they had experienced in church. Why Jewish people would revere those holidays as highly as they do. So what I hope to do is put together programs on all 7 holidays in Leviticus 23 that the Bible and our Lord calls divine appointments, and educate Christian people and even some Jewish people who are not aware of their beautifully rich background of what it's all about.
Oh, that's amazing. Do you remember what your very first job was?
Yeah. My dad believed in work, and from 7 years old on, I caddied. I carried golf bags for people at the West Palm Beach Country Club. and then later in North Carolina in the summers when he would go up. It was a vacation and it was fun, and I met my wife there, and a lot of wonderful things happened, but during the day you were expected to work. And I remember going double, meaning you were carrying 2 bags, and you got the princely sum when you finished if you had a guy that was generous of $1 for each bag for 9 holes. And I've had 2 knee replacements since then, so I'm kind of wondering if walking up and down those hills might have facilitated that a bit. But there again, that so dovetailed with, and then I worked for my wife's father at the golf course. Well, he was a tough guy to work for. But that's so dovetailed with my upbringing on the issues of honor and integrity, because golfers don't need a guy in striped suit with a red hanky when they make a mistake. I caught myself at a tournament one time because I inadvertently moved the ball in the rough when I laid the club behind it, and I called it on myself, which was expected. I didn't expect anybody to say, "What a great sportsman." I mean, that's just what you did. Arnold Palmer, Betsy King, people that have played wonderful golf have all lost major championships. And Palmer got over to putt one time in the Senior Open, I think, anyway, some tournament. And he backed away and said, "I'm going to have to call a stroke penalty on myself." The ball moved. And the guy he was playing with, whoever it was, said, "Well, Arnold, nobody saw it." He said, "I saw it." And he lost the tournament by 1 stroke. So I actually say that I gained my ethical code from playing golf, because you didn't need anybody to tell you what was right. And if you cheated, you just weren't a golfer. Go do something else.
Where did you do any of your law clerking in this area?
My what?
Were you
Law
a
clerk? Yeah, I clerked for Judge David W. Dyer, who was, again, a role model for me, like no role models. As a matter of fact, the Florida Bar put out a set of ethics tapes, and most ethics tapes are so dry and tiring that it's all you can do to listen to them. But Judge Dyer at that time was dying of throat cancer, and they sought him out to talk to him because he was universally respected as one of the finest jurists and most ethical men that ever took a breath. And I had the honor of clerking for him for 2 years. He was on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals out of New Orleans, but we were based in Miami, and the judge, it was the largest constitutional court in the world at that time because it took in all the southern states in the Canal Zone when we owned it. And we were expected to sit in every capital in 3-judge panels. So we'd get in a plane, and it might be New Orleans, it might be Houston or Austin. We didn't go to Austin. Houston or Dallas, Texas. We sat both places there, even though they weren't the state capitals, they were population centers. And it was just a fabulous experience. Judge Dyer's law clerks loved him so much, and up until he died, we had an annual get-together at his house down in Miami, and I would say it never had less than 90% attendance of all of the law clerks over the years, and he had 2 law clerks at one time that served 2-year tenure, so there were quite a few people. So that was just a fabulous experience. Yeah.
Did your father's, well, first before I ask you that, has your career been satisfying as a whole in the career of law?
Yeah, I would absolutely say so. I loved being a prosecutor. I felt like we were the good guys and wore the white hats and had to play by the rules, and that fell right in line with my upbringing. You weren't trying to fool anybody. You were trying to convince people that the true evidence was sufficient, and you accepted the jury's verdict as their view, and I really, really enjoyed that. And I also enjoyed in the private practice, actually, a lot of the things that I didn't get paid too well for, but helping people who were, and I think all lawyers really, if they, I mean, lawyers' overhead now is so crushing that I just don't see how they have time to really, devote much to stuff that doesn't pay for that computer system and everything that they're expected to have. But it was much different. You have to understand, it was much different. When I first came up as a lawyer, I didn't even know where to stand in the courtroom, and I was up against an older lawyer. I think it was in some kind of stupid case, and not amounting to too much, which is why the guy I was working for let me handle it. But the other lawyer told me where to stand, when my opening was, and after the trial was over, I don't even remember how it turned out, but he gave me a very friendly critique of what I needed to do to become a lawyer. And if you needed a continuance, you'd pick up the phone and say, Joe, Tom, Dick, I want to go to the mountains for a couple of weeks. I'd like to have 2 weeks on that answer. And they would say, you got it, and you never thought another thing about it. Now, even when I was in the private practice, you'd write 3 letters and, all of that kind of stuff, and then hope that they honored their word. So I saw that turn in the law, and I think most lawyers will tell you, because most lawyers are fine, ethical people, that they're disappointed in the turn that the practice of law has taken. But for me, it was a wonderful thing. I was never a huge money maker, but I was happy what I did, and I made sure to take some time with my family, and so it worked out great for me.
What has it been like following in your father's legacy of the law for the state of Florida?
Well, it's been an honor. Fortunately, in stature and in manner and all other things, my father and I were so different in appearance that I don't think people were kind enough not to compare me to him, because I have heard and read that he was a fabulous lawyer. And I did, when I was in school in Miami, slip in the back of the courtroom many times when he was presiding as a district judge. And he was just the best I ever saw. But my father, as I said, was more interested in being an honorable lawyer than being anything. And I didn't have many comparisons. My comparisons were whether or not I was behaving the way he would want me to behave, not who thought what. And I'm sure, was I the lawyer he was? No chance. I was nowhere near as good as he was. But then most other people weren't either, so I didn't worry about that.
Did he ever offer you any words of wisdom when you started your career?
He did. He said that law was a jealous mistress, and that if I wanted to be successful, I'd have to roll up my sleeves and work. And at the beginning, that I had to expect to work weekends and nights. And he also said, which I took umbrage at, he said, you'll never be worth anything to anybody for the first 5 years of your practice because you're learning. And I think maybe things are on a quicker curve now, but he was right. You just have to have a body of experience to know how to handle yourself and maybe judge for the veracity of clients and those types of things. That and the integrity thing. Work hard and behave yourself.
What has been the most important case that you've ever been involved with in Palm Beach County?
I don't know that any of them have been that important. The ones that stand out in my mind, I tried a man in a fraud case which took almost 2 months for selling drink machines, dispensing machines, and prime locations, and it turned out the locations were in the middle of the intercoastal and in the garbage dump, and people from all over the country had picked up on these ads and sold what they had and moved south. And by the time I got it, nobody had wanted to prosecute the case because they knew it was going to take a long time, and it wasn't the most fascinating case in the world, but I tried it and got a conviction on, I think, 10 counts out of 50 because some of my victims were dead by that time and all of that. And later it got overturned on appeal, saying there was not enough evidence to convict, which the guy had already served his term. So, and then I did the 2 inquests that I'm aware of that have been done, certainly in this area, in the last 30 years. We had a black male hang himself out in Belvedere, and there were all kinds of allegations that he had been lynched by the police or others. And Judge Cohen conducted an inquest. Judge Harold Cohen did a fabulous job. I spent 17 years of my prosecution time out in the Glades because it was something I had done as a kid, and I enjoyed that area. It went 2.5 days, and I think it was truly obvious to everybody that had an open mind. This young man had drug and alcohol problems and couldn't keep a job because he would get caught up with on child support or rearages and all of that, and just went to his grandmother's house and hung himself. I'm sure there are other people that believe that he was lynched. They're not going to change their mind. And then I did the other inquest, the only other 2 I'm aware of in this area of Florida at all, where a young police officer shot a young black male at a school down in Delray. And in the first case, the hanging case, the court came back with a finding of suicide. The second case came back with manslaughter, but the charges were never filed. It wasn't my choice, and I'll just leave it at that. I did my job, but I did an awful lot of interesting things to me in the Glades. I was sent out there to combat the White Patriot Party originally, which is the militant wing, as if there's an unmilitant wing of the Ku Klux Klan. A guy had heard, I think it was Jack Cole or somebody on radio interviewing one of these Klansmen, and this was a white guy, and he'd gotten a shoving match with an African-American gentleman at a filling station, and so he contacted the number that he'd gotten off of the TV show, or radio show, I think it was, and became a full-fledged member and started to sell these horribly violent people in the Glades. And it was a difficult prosecution because, thank God, they hadn't gotten to the point of hurting anybody seriously, but they had tried. And we were able to infiltrate them, and the 7 people who were the real leadership of it were found guilty. And then right after that, there was a church, and I'm not going to name it, but it was a offshoot screwball church run by a man who claimed to be the way to heaven and the way to everything. And we got word that young girls, as soon as they came into puberty, the daughters of the members were being fondled by this guy as a rite of passage. And, we tried them, and we had our star witness was very shaky and got arrested for possession of cocaine in the meantime, and the case was transferred down to Fort Lauderdale, and it terminated with guilty pleas from the people we went after, and we didn't get a whole lot, but later, in a second prosecution against this quote preacher, he got 15 years or something, and spent most of the end of his life in prison, which was exactly where he belonged. And I love that about the Glades. It was always something that affect different types of things.
Coming from a prominent family with a background in law, did that in any way encourage you for a civic responsibility?
Well, it did, because my parents were involved in the civic areas. My dad, in a very quiet way. My mother came by this naturally. When they lived at the old Carmichael house, the horrible hurricane, I don't remember whether it was a 27 or 28, but I mean it wiped places out. And my mother's mother, my grandmother, whom I never met, apparently was a prim and proper lady from the word go, but became worried about the migrant workers out in the glades, because everything was just... My mother told me that she thought even up to 10,000 people died, that there were just so many people out there was no record of, and they actually used bulldozers just to cut graves and put people in them. And it was just a major disaster. Well, her mother got a truck, because my grandfather had bought a little farm up in Canal Point, which is just north of Belvedere. He liked the soil, and in addition to everything, he was a man for all seasons. He liked to get out there and get to work, get away from the law. She took blankets and food for weeks, my grandmother, out to the glades. They lived close, to the funeral home over here, and all the funeral home had to do was call my grandmother and grandfather's house, and if somebody was being buried that they didn't have anybody to play the piano or whatever, somebody at my grandparents' house, one of the kids or my grandmother, would go over and play the piano and try to help out. And those may seem like little insignificant things, but to me they show a real heart for what was going on. My dad gave in very quiet ways by backing the Little League baseball program. And one of the things that people will never know, how many kids that could not afford golf lessons my dad would pay with pro, and never mention it to anybody. Get the kid a series of 10 lessons or something, and they just both had a real heart. They recognized what I recognized, that we were very blessed people, and we needed to give back.
Are you personally involved in any civic or other organizations in the county or nationally?
Well, probably not to the extent that I should be. I have helped here back ministries to the homeless, taking them food, and we have a couple that is really great at that. And my wife and I have supported that as strongly as we can. I have been more involved, I would say, overseas. I took the March of the Living with some Jewish friends from Israel. We went into the Ukraine and helped serve food to elderly Jews who were isolated to their apartments. And I want to tell you, the Ukraine is a harsh, anti-Semitic place, and these poor people were living at risk for their lives, and many of them served heroically in the Second World War for the Soviet Union, but when the war was over, they're just completely forgotten, and then the Soviet Union fell apart, and Ukraine was no longer, so their lifetime cradle-to-grave care just went right out the window. And we are involved in a number of charities to and for the Jewish people, a number of national organizations we give. I wouldn't say we give enough to support, we don't. And that's because I think we owe the Jewish people so much.
Do you think Florida law statutes have kept current with the growth of the immigrant population of Palm Beach County?
I don't know a whole lot about it, to be honest with you, but I don't think the country as a whole has reacted very well and anticipated the influx. And I hear a lot of ideas and a lot of debating, and I don't see much happening. And it's a problem that has to be fairly and justly dealt with, but also with mercy. And I don't see anything like that on the table in Florida or anyplace else.
What do you see as been positive growth in the area in all respects?
Yeah, I knew that I might be asked that. There's just been so many wonderful things that have happened over the years. The Kravitz Center is Exhibit A of an opportunity to see almost any kind of show or presentation that was not available to us. We had a place out on Military, I think, called the Polo Grounds, and they had a huge tent out there. And some off-Broadway plays like Brigadoon or whatever the play was anyway, and Annie Get Your Gun and things like that would come by, and we would go out there. But we live in a blessed location, and I don't see growth as totally bad as long as it's managed. And Florida has had some foresight in setting aside public areas to preserve, like the old Everglades. I really have mixed emotions on what's happening over in to U.S. Sugar, because I love the Everglades and I'd hate to see it dried up and turned into condos. On the other hand, you're talking about communities out there that are absolutely going to be wiped out economically if that happens. So I think a lot of the growth has been very good, and I think a lot of it has been haphazard and not very well planned for. Our major north-south is I-95. You know, it's a federal highway, and I think some of those things could have been planned better. But I mean, the improvement of the waterfront down where we've just done that in the city of West Palm, I think is a great thing. I have some concerns about our ability to afford it right now, and I, like everybody else, don't like paying property taxes. But I think I think the growth on balance is very good.
You've spoken often about the wildlife that you encountered when you were a young person.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about its depletion now as an older person living here?
Well, the Florida Game and Freshwater Fish Commission, to me, is an underfunded group that has actually done quite a good job in certain areas. When I was a boy, and you would go turkey hunting at Thanksgiving, which we traditionally did, out in the woods for 3 or 4 days, my mom along with us, you almost never saw a turkey. And they've made a tremendous comeback, and I think some of that was by importation of there are 4 types of turkeys in this country, and getting the proper species back into Florida and limiting the amount that can be taken and harvested. I think they've done a really good job on that. The thing that breaks my heart is, I used to caddy, as I said, down at the Lake Worth Golf Course too, which is right on the Intercoastal, and in the winter months, in the fall and winter, the sky down the Intercoastal would be black with ducks going south. I mean, hundreds. And now you don't see one. So the effect of civilization on certain species has just been devastating.